is that there's not just one race of extraterrestrials that have visited Earth. This is something that Reagan was really fascinated in when he was briefed back in 1981. He was told at that time there were 5 different races that we know that have visited Earth. And why do we know it? Because we have crafts that are at least 5 different technologies. We have extraterrestrials who are not the same biologically or physiologically, and we have technologies that are all different. So we know then, we knew then, and we know now that there are other races. So when we talking about one particular species, the Ebens, that have visited Earth, and that they crashed in 47, and we found a craft also in 49. So there were 2 crashes. But what about the Kingman crash? The Kingman crash in 1953 involved an entirely different species of extraterrestrials. Okay, the 1964 crash in Nevada near the Ant Mine, entirely different species of extraterrestrials. So in a matter of 15 or 20 years, there's 3 species that we know that have visited Earth. Now, when I was briefed in 1978, there were 5. Reagan was briefed on 5. So they all have different technologies. How did they all interface with Earthlings? I don't know. I wish I did. Maybe Geraldine knows a lot more about it than I do. But there are other species that have interacted with humans, not just one. There were 2 occasions where I have had a viewing of an extraterrestrial. One was in I worked at Area 51 on 2 different occasions, and I was a counterintelligence officer out there. There were 4 other AFOSI agents out there with me. But on one particular occasion, I went to a S2 annex. It was called an X2 annex, which is a little bit northwest of the Groom Lake Toman area. I went up there to interview somebody regarding an investigation. I went into an area, a control room, and I watched a closed circuit monitor of an extraterrestrial in another room. So I actually saw one, but it was through a closed circuit.
And what can you describe what you saw in that moment?
Yeah. It was a typical. I would call it a typical gray. It was small, about 4.5 foot tall. Had very, very large eyes, no ears, large head, small slit for a mouth. It didn't have any vocal cords. It wasn't able to speak words. Couldn't speak a word, but it did make sounds. The sounds came out of the head and not out of the mouth. Now, I don't know how that. I can't explain that. I'm not a doctor, but the sounds that were being made were coming out of the head. And I don't know the full story of what they were doing in that room and whether they were understanding or whether they were communicating. So that's what I saw.
And what was the other occasion you saw?
The other occasion was one that had escaped from captivity at the complex at S2 annex. It made its way all the way up to an area called the northern perimeter of the Nellis Test and Training Range, up near a place called Silver Bow. That's an old mining area. It was shot and killed by military police, and I was up there to help investigate the incident, and I saw it. It was dead, but I saw it. Now this entity was large, about probably 7 foot tall. It had a very large head, and a facial appearance looked like a praying mantis to me. I didn't see all of the body because part of it was covered. It had a cape. It was on the ground, serpine, face up, and the hands were very large, and it didn't look like it had a thumb, but the fingers were webbed. There were webs in their fingers, and that's about all I can remember seeing. Well, let's talk about interdimensional. Dr. Putoff wrote a paper a few years ago about trans-dimensional, and if you read that paper, it's very fascinating. But there's a possibility that these a particular species comes from a far distance, thousands of light years, and they come to Earth, and instead, because they're so advanced, instead of traveling back and forth, they're able to move within dimensions. So when they're not here in our dimension, they move into another dimension and stay there until they have to come out and come interact with us. So that's a possibility. I can see that's a possibility. Now, interdimensional beings, I've never read anything official. I mean, I've read thousands of classified documents pertaining to UFOs and extraterrestrials. I've never read anything pertaining to interdimensional. I'm not saying it didn't exist, but during my time, I never read anything about them. Maybe they do exist. Maybe they're out there. What their particular agenda is dealing with us, I wish I knew. But one of the things I learned from Dr. Putoff when I worked for him is that when we humans try to understand extraterrestrials, we have to totally take ourselves out of our box and go into their box, because they don't think like we do. They don't reason like we do. They have a different brain. One particular species has 24 lobes in their brain, which is a lot more than we have. And they're able to do things with their mind that we could never do.